The arrival at the hotel. Isabella Thompson, one of the wealthiest businesswomen in the country, stepped out of her sleek black car and looked up at the grand entrance of the majestic Royal Hotel. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the building's tall marble pillars. The hotel was famous for hosting celebrities, politicians, and the elite. Tonight, Isabella was here for a business meeting with some high-profile investors. Dressed in an elegant white dress, her signature style, Isabella exuded confidence. Her black curls framed her face, and her warm brown eyes scanned the busy hotel entrance as bellhops rushed to open doors and carry luggage for the guests. She gave a small nod of appreciation as one of the bellhops offered to take her suitcase. It was a small bag for a woman who traveled light despite her wealth. "Welcome to Majestic Royal, Mom," the bellhop greeted her, smiling politely. Isabella smiled back and stepped into the luxurious lobby, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. The lobby was stunning, filled with crystal chandeliers and expensive art. Guests in designer suits and dresses moved about, sipping drinks and chatting. Isabella had visited many such places in her career, but each time she was reminded of how far she'd come. From humble beginnings to running a billion-dollar company, she had worked hard for everything she had. And yet, she still felt the eyes of people judging her, not for her wealth or success, but for her skin color. As she approached the front desk, a young receptionist greeted her with a polite but distant smile. "Good evening. How can I assist you?" The receptionist asked, her voice pleasant but lacking warmth. "I have a reservation under Thompson, Isabella Thompson," Isabella said confidently, placing her black leather purse on the counter. The receptionist's eyes briefly widened as she glanced at the computer screen and then back at Isabella. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of uncertainty. "Thompson, you said?" "Yes, Isabella Thompson," she repeated, keeping her tone polite. Isabella was used to these reactions. It wasn't uncommon for people to look at her and not believe she could be one of the richest people in the country. The receptionist typed something into the computer, her fingers moving slower than usual. There was a long pause, and Isabella noticed the receptionist exchange glances with her colleague, a man standing nearby who quickly whispered something to her. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but it seems there's been a mistake. We don't have any available rooms at the moment," the receptionist said, her tone now noticeably colder. "We must have overbooked." Isabella's eyebrows raised in surprise. She had booked this room weeks ago, ensuring everything was set for her important meeting tonight. She remained calm, though a small knot of frustration began to tighten in her chest. "Overbooked," she repeated, her voice steady. "I made this reservation well in advance. Surely there must be something available." "I'm afraid not, ma'am," the receptionist replied, her voice almost mechanical now. "There's nothing we can do. I apologize for the inconvenience." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. She had faced discrimination before, but in places like this, high-end establishments, it was often more subtle. She knew what was happening, but she didn't want to believe it. Not here, not now. She could feel the eyes of other guests in the lobby, some watching curiously, others pretending not to notice. Taking a deep breath, Isabella maintained her composure. "I see. Is your manager available? I'd like to speak with them." The receptionist hesitated for a moment before replying. "I'm the acting manager tonight, and unfortunately, there's nothing else I can offer you. If you'd like, I can recommend a nearby hotel." The suggestion felt like an insult. Isabella's grip tightened around her purse strap. She had dealt with situations like this before, but each time, it stung. Here she was, a billionaire, and yet she was being treated like an outsider, unwelcome in a place that prided itself on luxury and service. She could have raised her voice, caused a scene, but that wasn't her style. Instead, she gave a small, determined smile and nodded. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice calm but firm. Turning on her heel, Isabella walked back toward the entrance. The hotel staff and guests continued about their business, But she knew many were still watching her. She kept her head high, knowing that this battle was far from over. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, her phone buzzed. It was her assistant, calling to confirm her meeting for tomorrow. Isabella took a deep breath, her mind already turning to the next step. She wasn't going to let this go. For Isabella Thompson, this was just the beginning. The unjust rejection. As Isabella stepped out of the majestic Royal Hotel, the cool evening air brushed against her skin. She paused at the entrance, collecting her thoughts. Her heart was pounding with frustration, but she knew that losing her composure wouldn't help the situation. The rejection wasn't just a simple mistake. It felt personal. She could sense the coldness in the receptionist's voice and the subtle exchange of glances between the staff members. This wasn't the first time Isabella had faced discrimination, but it never ceased to sting. She glanced around the bustling street, her eyes settling on the luxury cars pulling up to the hotel's entrance. Wealthy guests were treated with respect and care, but despite her billionaire status, she had just been pushed aside. Isabella quickly dialed her assistant, Chloe, who picked up on the second ring. "Yes, Miss Thompson. Is everything all right?" Chloe's voice was warm, a contrast to the coldness Isabella had just experienced. "Chloe, I need you to call the investors and move our meeting to another location. I'm not staying here tonight," Isabella said firmly, but calmly. She didn't want her assistant to pick up on her frustration just yet. There was no point in worrying her. "Another location? But isn't the meeting room at Majestic Royale already reserved?" "Yes, but there's been a change of plans," Isabella replied, keeping her voice even. "I was just turned away from the hotel. They're claiming they've overbooked, but I know it's not about the rooms." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "What? That doesn't make sense. You're one of their most important guests for tonight. Do you want me to speak to the management?" "No," Isabella said, shaking her head even though Chloe couldn't see her. "This isn't something a phone call can fix right now. I'll handle it my way." Chloe understood the unspoken meaning in her boss's words. "Of course. I'll get on it right away. Where would you like to move the meeting?" Isabella thought for a moment. "The Starlight Hotel. It's just down the street. I'll head there now." "Got it. I'll inform the investors and make the necessary arrangements." Isabella thanked her assistant and hung up the phone. She looked back at the grand entrance of the Majestic Royal, the same hotel that had hosted royalty and dignitaries, and yet tonight it had turned her away. She could feel the eyes of other guests on her as they passed by, some curious, others indifferent. Instead of walking away quietly, she made a mental note. This rejection wouldn't go unnoticed. It was one thing to be turned down, but it was another to be denied simply because of who she was. Before leaving, Isabella pulled out her phone again and took a picture of the hotel's grand entrance. She knew she'd need this later. It was a small move, but in her world, where every action had power, it mattered. She wasn't just a guest who'd been rejected. She was someone with influence, someone whose voice could be heard. The ride to the Starlight Hotel was quick, but Isabella's mind raced the entire time. Why had she been treated like this? Was it because she didn't fit the image the hotel expected? She had faced plenty of prejudice throughout her life, but no matter how much wealth or success she gained, some doors still closed in her face. As the car pulled up to the Starlight Hotel, the staff immediately rushed to assist her, offering warm greetings and smiles. This hotel wasn't as prestigious as the Majestic Royale, but the warmth and respect in their reception were worth more than the luxury the other hotel claimed to offer. Isabella stepped out, greeted by a polite concierge. "Welcome to Starlight, Miss Thompson. We've been expecting you," the concierge said, taking her bag with a kind smile. It was a reminder to Isabella that respect couldn't always be bought with status or money. Sometimes it came from genuine people who valued others for who they were, not for their appearance or the wealth they carried. As she walked into the lobby, her phone buzzed with messages from her assistant, confirming that the investors had agreed to the new location for their meeting. Everything was back on track, But Isabella's thoughts remained on the unfair treatment she'd faced at the Majestic Royal. Sitting down in the lounge, she opened her laptop, already planning her next move. She wasn't going to let this slide. As someone who had overcome countless challenges, she knew that change came when people stood up against injustice. This wasn't just about her. It was about the message it sent to others. The rejection she faced was unjust, and Isabella Thompson wasn't one to stay silent. The meeting of power. The atmosphere in the Starlight Hotel's conference room was a sharp contrast to Isabella's earlier experience. As she entered, the room was elegantly set up for the high-stakes meeting she had planned for months. It wasn't the Majestic Royal, but it had its own charm, and more importantly, it held no ill will toward her. Isabella scanned the room, her sharp eyes taking in the details. The investors, a mix of high-ranking officials and industry leaders, were already seated around a grand oak table, chatting among themselves. Some of them noticed her arrival and stood up, greeting her with smiles and nods of respect. These people knew who she was, not just a billionaire, but a trailblazer in the world of business. Her assistant, Chloe, was standing by her side, ready with all the documents and files needed for the meeting. "Everything's set, Miss Thompson. The presentation is ready, and I've ensured all the investors have the briefing materials," she whispered as she handed her a sleek tablet. "Good work, Chloe," Isabella responded with a confident nod, though her mind briefly wandered back to the Majestic Royal. It wasn't anger that consumed her anymore. It was resolve. She had a point to make, but for now, she would focus on the business at hand. As the meeting began, Isabella commanded the room. Her voice was clear, calm, and filled with authority. She presented her vision for the groundbreaking new project her company was spearheading, an initiative that would reshape industries across the globe. The investors were hooked. Every slide she showed, every fact she laid out, was met with nods of approval. Her reputation for success preceded her, and no one in this room doubted her capabilities. One of the lead investors, a tall, silver-haired man named Mr. Carson, spoke up after her presentation. "Miss Thompson, this project is incredibly impressive. Your track record speaks for itself. We're excited to be part of this, but there's one thing I'd like to address." Isabella raised an eyebrow. She had anticipated questions, but the tone of his voice suggested something more. "Of course, Mr. Carson. What's on your mind?" Mr. Carson cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly. "I heard about what happened at the Majestic Royal earlier this evening. It's deeply concerning to hear that someone of your stature was treated in such a manner." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Isabella hadn't expected anyone to bring up the incident, especially not here, in the middle of such an important meeting. Her heart tightened for a moment, but she didn't let it show. She met Mr. Carson's gaze with calm determination. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "I was refused service at the hotel. They claimed it was an issue with overbooking, but we all know that wasn't the real reason. Unfortunately, such incidents are not uncommon, even today." The room fell silent. The weight of her words hung in the air, and the investors looked on, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. These were powerful individuals, many of whom had likely never faced such blatant prejudice. Isabella continued, "What happened to me tonight isn't just about a room in a hotel. It's about the barriers that still exist, no matter how much wealth or success someone achieves. But I've faced these barriers before, and I will continue to break them." Mr. Carson nodded, visibly impressed by her composure. "I'm glad you're addressing this. It's unacceptable, and as investors in your vision, we stand with you, not only in business, but against such injustices." The others murmured in agreement, some nodding emphatically. Isabella's heart swelled slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. The support meant something, but more importantly, it reinforced her mission, to not just succeed for herself, but to pave the way for others who faced similar challenges. The rest of the meeting flowed smoothly, with investors confirming their interest and commitment to the project. Isabella's presentation had been flawless, and she could feel the momentum building. The project would move forward, and despite the earlier setback, tonight would end in victory. As the meeting concluded and the investors began to leave, Isabella lingered behind, allowing herself a moment to reflect. The rejection at the Majestic Royal was still fresh in her mind, but the support she had received tonight reinforced her strength. Before leaving the conference room, Isabella turned to Chloe. "We're not done with the Majestic Royal. I want a full report on the incident, and I'm not letting this go quietly." Chloe nodded, understanding the gravity of her boss's words. "I'll get on it right away, Miss Thompson." Isabella smiled slightly, her resolve stronger than ever. The night had been a reminder that despite the progress society had made, there were still battles to be fought, and she was ready for them all. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but Isabella Thompson had never been one to back down from a fight, especially one as personal as this. The public outcry. The morning sun rose over the city, casting its golden light on the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets. But inside the Majestic Royal, the atmosphere was far from serene. What had begun as an ordinary day quickly spiraled into chaos as news of the previous night's incident with Isabella Thompson began to spread. Unbeknownst to the hotel management, Isabella's assistant Chloe had contacted a journalist the moment they left the hotel. The story of how a billionaire black woman had been refused service by one of the most prestigious hotels in the city was now trending across social media and the news. Videos, photos, and first-hand accounts were circulating, and outrage was building. By midday, the hotel's front desk was flooded with phone calls. Guests were canceling their reservations, and the hotel's social media accounts were inundated with angry comments and demands for answers. The hotel's management team scrambled to respond, but their generic statements of apology only added fuel to the fire. The public was not interested in a vague apology. They wanted accountability. Isabella sat at her desk, scrolling through her phone as she watched the situation unfold. Messages of support poured in from people all over the world. Public figures, influencers, and even celebrities were speaking out, demanding justice and calling out the Majestic Royal for their discriminatory actions. Her phone buzzed with another call, and this time it was her lawyer. "Isabella, I've reviewed the footage Chloe sent me from the lobby. There's more than enough evidence here to take legal action. Do you want to proceed?" Isabella leaned back in her chair, considering her options. "I want them to be held accountable," she replied firmly. "But I also want to send a bigger message. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who's ever been judged based on the color of their skin." Her lawyer's voice was resolute. "We can do both. We'll file the lawsuit, but we'll also make sure this story stays in the public eye. This is bigger than just a legal case. It's a social issue, and people need to see that." As they discussed the legal strategy, Isabella's assistant Chloe entered the office with a tablet in hand. "Miss Thompson, I thought you might want to see this. The hotel just released another statement." Isabella took the tablet and read the message on the screen. It was another hollow apology, this time stating that the incident was a misunderstanding and had nothing to do with race. The hotel claimed there had been a mix-up with reservations due to high demand and that Isabella had simply been affected by overbooking. Isabella's jaw tightened. A misunderstanding. "They had no problem turning me away until they realized who I was," she said, her voice edged with frustration. "They're trying to downplay what happened." Chloe nodded. "People aren't buying it, though. Their attempt to brush this off is backfiring. Public support is still overwhelmingly in your favor." Isabella turned her attention back to the headlines. She knew that the hotel's weak response wouldn't stop the momentum building online. The public had seen through their excuses, and the demand for change was growing louder. Later that day, a major news network reached out, requesting an interview with Isabella. She agreed, knowing that this would be an opportunity to share her side of the story on a national platform. When the cameras rolled, Isabella spoke with grace and conviction. She didn't hold back as she recounted the events of the previous night. The cold dismissal, the assumption that she didn't belong, and the stark reality of racial bias that still existed, even in places where wealth and success should break down those barriers. "This isn't just about a hotel room," Isabella said, her voice steady but passionate. "This is about the systemic discrimination that people of color face every day. It's about how, no matter how much you achieve, there are still places and people who will look at you and see only your skin color. And that needs to change." Her words resonated deeply, and within hours, the interview went viral. The story of Isabella's experience became a rallying cry for others who had faced similar injustices. Stories of discrimination at other establishments began surfacing, and the call for boycotts grew louder. The public outrage wasn't just limited to social media. Protests began to form outside the majestic Royal, with people holding signs that read, "Equality for all and justice for Isabella." The hotel's reputation was plummeting, and their attempts to salvage it with more apologies were failing. As the day came to an end, Isabella sat in her office, feeling the weight of what had happened. This was no longer just about her. It had become something much bigger. The world was watching, and change was on the horizon. Chloe approached her once more, a smile on her face. "The investors called. They're still fully committed to the project. They believe in you, Isabella, and they're standing behind you." Isabella smiled back, feeling a sense of triumph. "Good, because this fight isn't over. Not by a long shot." She had started this journey with a simple goal: to break down barriers in the business world. But now, it was about breaking down barriers everywhere. The hotel's desperate move. The next morning, the sun had barely risen, but the lobby of the majestic Royal was buzzing with activity. The management team had been working overnight, trying to control the growing crisis. Their brand, which had once been synonymous with luxury, was now being dragged through the mud. The front doors of the hotel were surrounded by protesters, chanting for equality and justice, with news cameras capturing every moment. Inside, the hotel staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to expect next. In a secluded conference room, the hotel's CEO, Mr. Langston, sat at the head of a long table. Around him were his legal team, PR specialists, and senior managers, all looking tense. They had been brainstorming all night, and none of their solutions seemed to be enough. "Let's be real here," one of the PR experts spoke up, flipping through pages of social media reports. "Our usual approach isn't working. Every time we release a statement, it only adds fuel to the fire. We need to take drastic action." Mr. Langston rubbed his temples. "We can't afford to lose more business. Cancellations are flooding in, and we're already seeing investors back out of deals." A member of the legal team cleared his throat. "We could try to settle with Ms. Thompson privately. Offer her a financial settlement in exchange for her silence." The room fell silent as the suggestion hung in the air. It was a tactic they had used in the past, and in those cases, the issue had gone away quietly. But this time, it felt different. The public wasn't going to let this incident be swept under the rug. Mr. Langston frowned. "I'm not sure that will work with her. She's too high profile. This isn't about money for her." "We could extend a personal apology," another voice suggested. "Invite her back to the hotel, treat her with the respect she deserves, and issue a public statement acknowledging our mistake." But before anyone could agree, the head of PR cut in. "It's too late for that. This has gone beyond just apologizing to her. People want us to make real changes. They're calling us out for systemic racism." Mr. Langston shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't like where this was heading. "So what do you suggest?" "We need to make a symbolic gesture, something bold that shows we're committed to addressing the issue," the PR expert replied. "What if we made Ms. Thompson a part of the solution? Offer her a role in shaping new diversity policies for the hotel chain. Publicly partner with her to fight discrimination." The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't out of skepticism. It was out of realization. It was a move that could potentially change the narrative. Mr. Langston considered it, leaning back in his chair. You think she'd go for it? It's possible, the PR expert said. If we approach her the right way, this would show that we're not just reacting to bad press, but genuinely committed to making things right. The legal team nodded slowly, understanding the implications. It's risky, but it could work, one of them added. However, we'd need to be fully transparent. This won't be just for show. It would mean real, lasting changes. As the meeting went on, the plan began to take shape. The hotel would reach out to Isabella Thompson directly, not with an empty apology or a check, but with an offer to collaborate. She would be invited to help create new policies that ensured no one else would experience what she had endured. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the protests were growing louder. Reporters pushed through the crowds, trying to get interviews with the demonstrators. Signs with bold messages of equality and justice filled the streets. Inside her office, Isabella sat watching the live news coverage, her expression unreadable. The hotel had yet to make a real move, and she was waiting to see what they would do next. Her phone buzzed on her desk. It was her lawyer. "They've reached out," he said without preamble. "They want to meet with you." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "To settle?" "No," her lawyer replied. "They want to make you an offer. They're proposing you work with them to overhaul their diversity policies. They want to use this situation to make real changes in their hotel chain." For a moment, Isabella was silent. This wasn't the response she had expected, and she wasn't sure if she trusted their intentions. "Do you think they're serious?" she asked. "It's hard to say, but from the way they framed it, they're desperate to salvage their reputation. This could be an opportunity to push for real change, not just for the hotel, but for the industry as a whole." Isabella thought about it. She had always used her platform to advocate for equality, but this was different. This was personal. Did she want to help the very people who had disrespected her? "I'll think about it," she said at last. As she hung up the phone, her assistant Chloe entered the room, holding a newspaper. "Miss Thompson, the protests outside the hotel are getting bigger. It's all over the news." Isabella took the paper from her and glanced at the front page. Her own face stared back at her. Above a headline that read, "Billionaire Black Woman Denied by Luxury Hotel Sparks Nationwide Protests for Equality." She sighed. The world was watching, and whatever she decided to do next would have far-reaching consequences. "Chloe," she said quietly, "prepare a statement. I'm going to respond to their offer, but it's going to be on my terms." The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. "We need to make a symbolic gesture, something bold that shows we're committed to addressing the issue," the PR expert replied. "What if we made Ms. Thompson a part of the solution? Offer her a role in shaping new diversity policies for the hotel chain. Publicly partner with her to fight discrimination." The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't out of skepticism. It was out of realization. It was a move that could potentially change the narrative. Mr. Langston considered it, leaning back in his chair. "You think she'd go for it?" "It's possible," the PR expert said. "If we approach her the right way, this would show that we're not just reacting to bad press, but genuinely committed to making things right." The legal team nodded slowly, understanding the implications. "It's risky, but it could work," one of them added. "However, we'd need to be fully transparent. This won't be just for show. It would mean real, lasting changes." As the meeting went on, the plan began to take shape. The hotel would reach out to Isabella Thompson directly, not with an empty apology or a check, but with an offer to collaborate. She would be invited to help create new policies that ensured no one else would experience what she had endured. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the protests were growing louder. Reporters pushed through the crowds, trying to get interviews with the demonstrators. Signs with bold messages of equality and justice filled the streets. Inside her office, Isabella sat watching the live news coverage, her expression unreadable. The hotel had yet to make a real move, and she was waiting to see what they would do next. Her phone buzzed on her desk. It was her lawyer. "They've reached out," he said without preamble. They want to meet with you. Isabella raised an eyebrow. To settle? No, her lawyer replied. They want to make you an offer. They're proposing you work with them to overhaul their diversity policies. They want to use this situation to make real changes in their hotel chain. For a moment, Isabella was silent. This wasn't the response she had expected, and she wasn't sure if she trusted their intentions. Do you think they're serious? She asked. It's hard to say. But from the way they framed it, they're desperate to salvage their reputation. This could be an opportunity to push for real change, not just for the hotel, but for the industry as a whole. Isabella thought about it. She had always used her platform to advocate for equality, but this was different. This was personal. Did she want to help the very people who had disrespected her? I'll think about it, she said at last. As she hung up the phone, her assistant Chloe entered the room, holding a newspaper. Miss Thompson, the protests outside the hotel are getting bigger. It's all over the news. Isabella took the paper from her and glanced at the front page. Her own face stared back at her, above a headline that read, Billionaire Black Woman Denied by Luxury Hotel Sparks Nationwide Protests for Equality. She sighed. The world was watching, and whatever she decided to do next would have far-reaching consequences. Chloe, she said quietly, prepare a statement. I'm going to respond to their offer, but it's going to be on my terms. The wheels were in motion, and there was no turning back. The meeting of minds. The sun rose on another day, but this one felt different for Isabella Thompson. She was preparing for a pivotal meeting with the executives of the Majestic Royal. The air was thick with anticipation, and a sense of determination coursed through her veins. This was her chance to address not just her experience, but the systemic issues that plagued the luxury hotel industry. As she arrived at the hotel, the protests outside had only intensified. The crowd was larger, and their chants for equality echoed through the streets. News cameras were everywhere, capturing every moment. Isabella stepped out of her car, greeted by a flash of lights and questions from reporters. Miss Thompson, how do you feel about the hotel's recent attempts to reach out? Are you here to negotiate a deal? Isabella raised her hand, signaling for silence. Today is not about me. It's about creating real change in a system that has been broken for too long. She walked into the hotel, determined to make her voice heard. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Executives shuffled in the conference room, glancing at their notes, anxiously awaiting Isabella's arrival. When she entered, the room fell silent. She could feel their eyes on her, measuring her every move. Mr. Langston, the CEO, stood up to greet her. Miss Thompson, thank you for coming, he said, attempting a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Let's skip the pleasantries, Mr. Langston. We both know why I'm here, Isabella replied, her tone firm. Of course, he nodded, motioning for her to take a seat. We appreciate your willingness to discuss a partnership. We want to listen to your thoughts on how we can improve our policies. Isabella sat down, looking around the room at the team of executives. First, let's be clear. This is not just about implementing new policies. It's about changing the culture of this hotel and the industry as a whole. Your initial actions spoke volumes, and now it's time to turn those words into action. The executives shifted in their seats, a mix of concern and hope on their faces. Isabella could sense their fear of the consequences if they didn't handle this correctly. We need to address why this happened in the first place, she continued. You cannot simply hire a consultant to write new guidelines and expect change. It has to come from the top. You need to commit to diversity in hiring, training for staff, and a true dedication to treating all guests with respect. Mr. Langston nodded, scribbling notes. Absolutely. We're ready to take actionable steps. We could start by creating a diversity and inclusion board. You could lead it, if you're willing. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Why should I lead it? I'm not a spokesperson for your failures. You need to take responsibility for this. The room grew quiet, and Isabella felt the weight of their expectations. However, she continued, if you genuinely want to make changes, I'll consider it. But I want to see measurable outcomes. I want reports, accountability, and a commitment to a timeline for these changes. Mr. Langston exchanged glances with his team before responding. We can agree to that. We want to put together a detailed plan and timeline. We want you to feel confident that we're serious about making this work. Isabella could see the sincerity in their eyes, but she remained cautious. I'm willing to collaborate, but I won't let this become a public relations stunt. If I see even a hint of insincerity, I will speak out. A member of the legal team interjected. We understand, and we're fully committed to transparency throughout this process. We'll make sure that everything is documented and publicly shared. Our reputation depends on it. As the meeting progressed, they discussed various initiatives: diversity training for staff, outreach programs for underrepresented communities, and a public statement recognizing the hotel's failures. Isabella felt a sense of cautious optimism. As they wrapped up the meeting, Mr. Langston stood again. Thank you for your time and your insight, Ms. Thompson. We're ready to make changes, and we hope you'll help us lead the way. Isabella nodded but remained resolute. I will, but remember, actions speak louder than words. The world is watching, and so am I. After the meeting, Isabella left the hotel feeling a mix of hope and determination. She knew that this was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead, but she was ready to fight for what was right. As she stepped back into the sunlight, the chants of the protesters echoed in her ears. They were fighting for change, just as she was. And together, they would hold the majestic Royal accountable. The road ahead was long, but she believed that with persistence, they could create a better future for all. A new dawn. The days turned into weeks as Isabella Thompson worked tirelessly with the team at the majestic Royal. The hotel was committed to change, but Isabella knew that actions needed to speak louder than promises. She attended meetings, helped draft new policies, and participated in training sessions. Slowly, the hotel staff began to understand the importance of diversity and inclusion. The first big event was approaching: a community open house at the hotel. This would be an opportunity for the hotel to demonstrate its commitment to change. Isabella was excited, but also anxious. She wanted to ensure that the event went smoothly and showcase the new policies in action. As the day arrived, Isabella walked through the hotel, ensuring everything was in place. Banners hung proudly, promoting diversity and unity. The kitchen prepared a menu featuring dishes from various cultures, and staff wore pins that read, "Everyone is welcome here." The atmosphere was electric, with people from all walks of life arriving to see what the hotel had to offer. Isabella stood at the entrance, greeting guests with a smile. The crowd was diverse, reflecting the community's rich tapestry. She felt a sense of pride as she watched families mingle, laughing and enjoying the food. This was the kind of atmosphere she had fought for, a space where everyone felt valued and included. Throughout the event, Isabella shared her story with many guests. They listened intently, and some even shared their experiences with discrimination. She felt their pain and their hope for a better future. The conversations were deep and meaningful, building connections that transcended the boundaries of race and class. During the event, Mr. Langston took to the stage. He thanked Isabella for her leadership and introduced the new initiatives they had implemented. Today marks a new dawn for the majestic Royal. We are committed to not just welcoming everyone, but to celebrating our differences. We know that we have much work to do, but we are dedicated to listening, learning, and growing, he declared, his voice steady and sincere. As applause erupted in the room, Isabella felt a rush of emotion. She had witnessed a transformation, not just in the hotel, but in the hearts of those present. The executives were learning to be accountable, and the staff was embracing the change. But Isabella also knew this was just the beginning. She looked out into the audience, recognizing that the community was watching closely. They wanted to see if the hotel would uphold its promises. Would they truly commit to inclusivity, Or was it just a temporary phase? As the event continued, Isabella spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Her mother, Angela, had come to support her. Isabella felt a wave of warmth and gratitude. She rushed over and enveloped her mother in a hug. "Mom, I'm so glad you're here," Isabella said, her voice filled with emotion. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart," Angela replied, her eyes shining with pride. "You're making the difference. I'm so proud of you." Together, they walked through the event, sharing stories and laughter. Angela spoke with hotel staff, sharing her experiences and expressing hope for a more inclusive future. It warmed Isabella's heart to see her mother engaging with the staff, breaking down barriers and building connections. As the night drew to a close, Isabella stood outside the hotel, looking up at the bright lights. The event had been a success, and she felt hopeful about the future. Yet, deep down, she knew that the fight for equality was far from over. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the guests who had attended the event. "Thank you for sharing your story. It inspired me to speak out against the discrimination I've faced. Together, we can make a difference." Isabella smiled, knowing that her efforts were not in vain. Each conversation, each connection made, was a step towards a more inclusive world. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. As she prepared to leave, Mr. Langston approached her. "Isabella, thank you again for your hard work. We're committed to making these changes permanent. I hope you'll continue to guide us on this journey." Isabella nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility. "I will, but remember, it's not just about policies. It's about the people we serve. Let's keep that at the forefront of our mission." With that, she walked away, her heart full of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. Together, they could create a hotel where everyone felt welcome, a place where respect and dignity reigned. As Isabella stepped into the night, she knew that they were paving the way for a brighter future, not just for the majestic Royale, but for the entire community. The journey had just begun, and she was determined to see it through.